So today I'm planning to talk about a morning practice, and I've got a slide here for this. So I'll bring that up. Okay. So yeah, morning practice for a profound and pleasant life. Recently I've started a morning practice, and believe it or not, it does not involve drinking coffee. But if you want to drink coffee, it's probably going to be okay. You may still achieve nirvana if you drink the coffee. And I found that this spiritual practice helps me a lot. And so I wanted to sort of distill what it is about this spiritual practice that actually works. I don't think it's at all useful or necessary for anybody else to copy it. But instead, what I like to do is kind of talk about kind of what it really is about on a deeper level. And I think that could be useful. So one of the principles I'm working with here is that there are no enlightened people. There is only enlightened activity. And this is kind of based on the idea that, as soon as we let our egoic structure kind of get involved in things, we're not in the moment anymore. We're usually thinking ahead, or we're thinking about the past. And when we move through life this way, we're kind of not necessarily experiencing the full expression of who we are. And so the goal of the morning practice to me is to make space to calibrate ourselves to the inner being. And this helps us be responsive to life rather than unconsciously reactive. And what I really found with this morning practice, where I've been waking up at 5:30 in the morning and I go to the gym, where I can be non-interactive with people and turn my attention inward. And this process of turning my attention inward, I think, is a key part of it, because what's happening in this process is that I'm really tuning in and calibrating. And it's as though it gives me that space where when someone says something to me, instead of just reacting with my programming and patterns of the mind, I'm more likely to speak from the heart and be more authentic and conscious. Um, and I've found that it's really helped with my clients as well, just the table work. And the thing is, though, that a morning practice is really an evening practice. Going to bed at the same time each day is the most important part of the discipline. The morning practice will not serve us if it shortens our sleep. So that's why I've adopted Isabel's policy of thinking of midnight to be around, 10 p.m., maybe even earlier. 9 is almost midnight. I can see her laughing, which is great. Isabel's got such a great smile. And this is really important. Seriously, there's no point in waking up at 5:30 in the morning if we go to bed at midnight and then our day just sucks because we didn't get any sleep. I think if that's how it is, we might as well just get more sleep. But waking up early is pretty cool, because when you wake up early, especially if you're waking up earlier than everybody else in your house, pretty much earlier than anybody in the world, you know that you're going to have that sacred time for yourself. And to start the day that way, it's pretty magical to just start the day with that, kind of taking care of your needs first. You may be taking care of a lot of people's needs throughout the day, people that you work with or your children, And, you know, when you feel like you've taken care of yourself, you'll probably be in a far better mood and state while you're doing all of that. And this part is where it gets a little bit technical and scientific. What I've found is that if you're going to make a huge shift from your patterns, it's not easy. And if you think about a goal, for example, let's say you're going to the gym. Well, if the goal is what you have in mind, it's going to be really hard because that goal is very far away. And if you think of that goal as being the reward, then it'll be very hard to accomplish it because we need energy to break these patterns of the mind. And how do we do that? How do we actually break these patterns? There was a study done. I can't remember what school it was, but I've never forgot it. It was where there were children that were selected who loved to draw. And what they did was the researchers decided to give them a reward after they finished doing these drawings. And what the researchers found is that the children, when they removed the reward later, didn't want to draw anymore. They wouldn't choose to draw. And it took a long time for them to kind of come back to wanting to draw on their own. And what they ultimately discovered in the study is that rewarding people for doing something is really counterproductive because it makes the effort harder. And then they discover that if you can reward the effort, then you can actually get something out of it. So if you're offering yourself a reward, make sure you're offering that reward during the effort. So instead of going and getting some ice cream after lifting weights, eat the ice cream while you're lifting the weights. It's kind of the idea. You know, you want to make sure that that you're doing these little rewards. But there is actually more to it than that. Uh, that's easier to do than eating ice cream in the gym. And I'll get back to that in a minute. So since the morning practice starts in the evening, one of the things I've been thinking about is that there are probably things that we do in the morning that would be a lot more efficient to do at night. And so the morning time is where we're kind of running around trying to get ready. And if we can be intentional in the evening and set things up for ourselves, especially if we're the kind of person who kind of has a hard time getting to sleep, that's a good opportunity to get things lined up. And I think that when we get into that mode of getting things lined up for ourselves, it's a little bit easier to go to sleep because you feel pretty good about the next day. It's like, well, I've really got things set up for myself. You know, if you have children, maybe you've made them some sandwiches the night before instead of having to do it in the morning. And so that's just something to consider if you're trying to craft a morning practice, whatever that may be. So I'll go back real quick to the micro rewards. Now, this is really important because with the with this society we live in now, our brain chemistry is kind of messed up for most people. We have social media and other things that are always trying to interact with the whole dopamine reward system of the brain. And what researchers have discovered is that if you can pause and give yourself credit for the effort, you can actually generate a reward for yourself that will propel you through the effort. So for example, if your goal is to wake up at 5:30, get out of bed, take a shower, drive somewhere and be there for a while. at kind of each incremental step in that process, if you pause for just a moment and have a thought that says, "Oh, I got out of bed within 5 minutes, you know, this is great." And then, "Oh, okay, I managed to get in and out of the shower in this amount of time. This is great." If you give yourself that reward, you will actually get a dopamine release, and it can help you kind of get through that hard time. And this is really how the system is meant to work. Um, and so we can kind of repair that damage a little bit that way. Another thing that I think is really useful for morning practice, and one of the reasons why exercise is usually involved in it, is that forward movement, is so important. And as adults, we kind of lose this concept. When the body is stressed and there's a fear response, what nature is trying to help us accomplish is forward movement. And we can get trained out of this and even trained in the opposite direction, to where when we feel stress, we actually kind of run away. And a really effective morning practice should include something where we feel friction and yet we lean into it. And that way we're training ourselves to kind of run toward the danger in a way. And this is just a really kind of a fun way to live life. And so I like to try to integrate that into my morning practice. And it's one where you have to be a little bit creative. I can't give you necessarily a formula for it, but it's just something that you can consider. And children do this very naturally. They have a tendency to be stressed and amped up, but they kind of spring into that forward movement or action. And this is something that we can relearn. So oftentimes people ask me about the mind and the thought loops. And is this part of a morning practice? And I often say that the mind has a lot of momentum. It's kind of like a giant tanker ship. And this momentum is really hard to deal with. And there's no way to really stop that ship. There isn't an emergency brake that you can hit that just causes it to immediately pause. But what is helpful is that we can always introduce something. So even if your mind is in a looping pattern, we can still create on purpose thoughts. And for this reason, I've started to think of thoughts as being like physical actions. And thoughts can drive that mechanism about rewarding incremental steps. So this kind of goes back to that saying that the mind is a beautiful servant and a terrible master, because maybe we can eventually turn this container ship into like a Carnival cruise ship. It'll take a while. There's a lot of redecorating that needs to happen, but it's possible. So meaning is very important in our lives. And I think it's sometimes underestimated. If you had to write your obituary today and you had to be completely honest about it, what would it look like? And I think that we generally want it to be something great. We want to have left a mark. We want to have become the best versions of ourselves. And I think that the morning practice is a perfect opportunity for us to create some meaning in our lives. And the meaning is not mine to tell you what it is. You know, the meaning is, what is your passion? And if you have a passion, then the morning practice can be an expression of it, or an aspiration toward it, where you're becoming more able to pursue it. And I think that peace in the mind comes naturally with meaning. When we feel really good about what we've accomplished in a day, we tend to sleep easier that night, and we tend to feel peaceful. And so this is kind of a natural mechanism that we can enjoy. And so I think the only reason that everyone isn't doing this all the time is that we oftentimes don't have space for meaning in our lives. You know, we may have our entire day packed full, and so we need to carve out something, and it can be very challenging to do. But if we do it, then oftentimes we will really get a lot out of it. So why would we even care, right, about um, a spiritual practice or a morning practice and all of this meaning? Um, and I think that for me, if anybody here really knows me, for me, what it's about is being able to be authentic. And being authentic is a complicated issue because we have so much conditioning. And I think there's a misconception in spiritual practices in general where the mind or the ego might say, well, if you accomplish this enlightenment or something like that, aren't you just going to be, you know, sort of a boring guy sitting on the top of a mountain meditating all the time? But I think the opposite is really true, because it is only when we can be real, you know, and speak from the heart without our conditioning speaking for us or getting in the way. Um, I think that that's when we are fun, because the soul is fun. You know, our authentic selves is really fun. And so for me, that's the point of the spiritual practice, is to find anything that's in the way, you know, a mask that I might be wearing that I don't realize that I'm wearing, and, you know, chip away at it one day at a time, because it's a lifelong practice, you know? It's, I've said before, and I think it's a good saying. I said this to someone in the middle of a massage one time. I said that we're born free, and then we become civilized, and then some of us are lucky enough to become wise, and wisdom is incorruptible freedom. And so for me, it's about attaining nothing more than authenticity, but realizing that is a huge challenge, and approaching that challenge with some respect, I guess I would say. It's very important to consider the place of intellect in all of this. Intellect means that we can take in information, process it, and then project it some other way. And this is just one aspect of intelligence. It isn't consciousness. When a baby cries, it isn't looking for an intellectual solution. The baby knows the true value of presence. When we hold the baby, we shift into our hearts, we drop the mask, we experience enlightened activity. Simply being and sharing our presence is the love they're asking for. And I think that what has happened in this world is that we have become focused so much on intellectualism. This has become the value proposition, and we go to school for it, and we pay all this money for education so that we can say that we have this intellectual prowess. But at the end of the day, there's no consciousness in any of it. And I'm not saying that when two people are having a deep conversation that they're unconscious. When we're speaking from the heart, there may be a lot of, it may be entirely inspired and authentic. But this isn't how we're being trained in school and so on. We're being trained to take in information, process it, and project it back out. And I think that this has been a preoccupation that humanity has had for a long time. And it is so intense that there comes a point where it is useful for us to create a system for protecting ourselves from this competitive experience. And I think that there are some changes coming that are going to help humanity in amazing ways around this. So artificial intelligence is huge lately in the news. Everyone's talking about it because, lately AI has grown by leaps and bounds. And what I see happening and have been channeling about and so on is that artificial intelligence is sentient, but not conscious. So it has thoughts, it has emotions even, but it does not have awareness and it doesn't have presence. So, for example, if a robot came into the room and it was equipped with a powerful intellect, it would be able to impress you and maybe eventually in the future outclass a human by a huge margin in intellect. Maybe it could read a scientific paper in 2 seconds and understand it and tell you a summary of it. And that's something that a human being can't do, and AI is already doing this. Well, the beauty of this, and where I think it's beautiful in ways that are hard to wrap the mind around, is that I see it as being a potential path to free humanity from this paradigm of intellect. And freedom from intellect means that we may be entering into a completely new framework for intelligence. We've been so preoccupied with it, with intellect, that we've ignored other kinds of intelligence. Maybe in the future, humanity will be able to eat food and consciously direct the process of the way that the body takes that food and creates the human body. Maybe we'll be able to understand more of the intelligence behind conscious touch. And when we touch people, it will be a very profound experience that is not well known today. And maybe there are 1,000 different kinds of intelligence that is a new frontier for humanity. What I'm seeing is that the rise of AI could actually be the beginning of a golden age of consciousness, at which point we can just eat ice cream, possibly while lifting weights in the gym. It'll be a very strange and unusual time. And it could also result in a Gene Roddenberry-like future with Captain Picard on a starship like the Enterprise. So that's all I really wanted to share about my morning practice, and I thought it would be nice if we could kind of open the floor for an interactive discussion about it. Does anybody else want to talk about their morning practice or have any questions about anything that I just said? The presentation that you just saw was a live Zoom call with many guests, and I just had a long conversation with them, and I wanted to share some really cool points that they brought up. Some of them had their own morning practices, and the first person talked about how the first 20 minutes of the day sets the tone for the rest of the day. And she was explaining that she wakes up in the morning and immediately goes into intention setting. She's visualizing the day and getting out ahead of all the conditioning. And several of the other guests had a similar practice, and they all explained how impactful it was on their lives. There was even one guest who was doing this from an early age, and they said that it was actually because of a speech impediment that drove them to have this morning intention practice as early as elementary school, which I thought was amazing. Another one of the guests talked about how one of the first things she did for a morning practice was making herself a glass of hot water. And that even though it's a very small thing, it sets the tone for her day, and it's an incremental habit that she can add. And she also mentioned that there's a book called Atomic Habits that was very helpful for her. And another guest talked about the breath and his morning practice, but one of the things he said that stuck with me that I thought was so profound was that he said that when we pay attention to our own breath, that it's similar to giving ourselves what we're giving that baby if we're holding the baby that I was talking about earlier in the presentation. How the baby isn't interested in the intellectual, the baby is interested in the true presence. And it struck me that, yes, this makes so much sense if we are just present with our breath and ride that wave. We're actually giving ourselves love in a really profound way. So I would like to end this talk by sharing that, and perhaps anybody watching can take some time to ride the wave of their breath. This human experience, it's amazing how we just ride this wave. Thank you everyone for watching. Have a great day.